Hello everybody, my name is Jeroen Warner from Wageningen University, Disaster Studies. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Brazil, and in the next few minutes I will introduce the concept of multi-stakeholder platforms to you by way of introducing this session. Multi-stakeholder platforms are processes in which people from different backgrounds, different identities sit around the table to tackle a problem that they see as mutually important. Yeah, they may not be called multi-stakeholder platforms, but you may know them as platforms, as mesas de concertacion, as river basin committees, as platforms, as networks. There may be different names for the same thing. Multi-stakeholder platforms in the water sector specifically came to the fore in around the millennium. And at that time, some people were asking, why is it so popular now, while in the development studies world, participation had seen its ups and downs? Well, these ups are really interesting. Multi-stakeholder platforms are a different way of looking at collective problems, how to solve them, how to solve disputes in a way that does not rely on a majority vote, but includes diversity of actors, people representing different identities, different livelihoods, different interests, and to see if there can be a consensus or at least a modus operandi to deal with a shared problem. This is important because if you already have a consensus and everything is clear, you might as well put a task force and solve the problem. But when the problem is not so clear, but it is clear to everybody that there is a problem and that it should be tackled, then it is important to sit around the table and to get more clarity about the interests, about the problem, and about how to move forward with each other. So multi-stakeholder platforms are a different way of problem resolution as well as dispute resolution, an alternative dispute resolution mechanism that avoids, for example, going to court and going into all kinds of conflictive and conflict reinforcing mechanisms, rather than a mechanism that improves mutual understanding. We need multi-stakeholder platforms where it is not immediately obvious what the problem is, or when we know what the problem is, what the solution should be. If there's many uncertainties, then we should sit around the table and get clarity and see what the interests and issues are. Learning is specifically important in this. A properly organized multi-stakeholder platform promotes learning, joint learning rather than individual learning. And this learning is important to learn about each other and about the problem. If this learning is successful, then there might be a learning alliance developing for long-term learning between the multiple stakeholders about a particular issue. So multi-stakeholder platforms have been sprouting at all kinds of levels, from the very local to the totally global. And in each case, the idea was to solve a collective issue. Now, one criticism leveled at multi-stakeholder platforms is that it seems to forge a consensus which may not be there, and that it ignores power differences. So it is important to design a process in which you don't put the foxes and the chickens in the same coop. You might need to have subgroups and help people who are not used to expressing their views, or who may be intimidated by power holders sitting at the same table, to speak their minds and to express their interests. Fortunately, there are different ways of doing that, of leveling the playing field, which don't solve all the problems, but at least avoid a naive idea of putting everybody around the table, leading to a consensus and solution. Three key success factors for multi-stakeholder platforms. One is that there is a degree of joint learning rather than individual learning. Second, that it brings food on the table, so results that pretty much everybody benefits from. And thirdly, that nobody feels left out, that there is no power difference that makes people shut up rather than speak their mind. It's like democracy. A multi-stakeholder platform can be seen as the least worst approach. As opposed to litigation, as opposed to power play, a multi-stakeholder platform can bring stakeholders together who would otherwise never meet and therefore not put themselves in each other's shoes. We had a multi-stakeholder platform in Peru and Dutch students who went to study what was happening, and they said basically nothing's happening here. But for the Peruvians, it was quite an achievement that people knew each other and talked to each other after a period of intense conflict. So there, for them, the existence of the platform, the knowledge of each other's existence and the willingness to talk to each other was already a major breakthrough. Some are not meant to survive, where they are one-shot multi-stakeholder platforms. One afternoon, everybody gets together and that's already a great achievement. But others are long-term investments where people see each other maybe for a year, every month or every couple of months. The stakeholder platform in the River Scheldt in Belgium and the Netherlands, the Scheldt estuary, there were some 15 or more than 15 meetings between Belgium and Dutch stakeholders, and there was an interesting development there. First, people tended to shout to each other, and then they started to listen to each other and become more, let's say, more collaborative, more cooperative. And in the end, they hammered out a solution that was thought impossible when they started talking to each other. So sometimes keeping a platform going for some years may have a benefit. People start to understand each other and become more cooperative. Multi-stakeholder platforms have been also a response to the less important role taken by the government. Government is backtracking, and that might mean that there is no one in charge, but there should be a facilitator or someone who can make things happen. Otherwise it becomes a kind of talking shop. So the facilitator has to make sure that everybody gets a hearing, that the issues become clear on the table and rather than hidden, and of course that the decisions in the end get taken. In terms of solution, multi-stakeholders platforms in themselves don't solve problems. We have to make sure that there is a mandate so that they can put, as it were, food on the table. So that's a takeaway message. Don't start a multi-stakeholder platform unless you have something to show for at the end, unless there is something to be gained for everybody. Thank you very much. Of course, you should read my book. I have a edited volume from 2007, Multi-Stakeholder Platforms for Integrated Water Management, which I think still holds true. There's also an excellent article by Edwards and Wollenberg, which talks about power differences in multi-stakeholder platforms, in this case about forests, but same issues. And there's working on learning alliances, which had a heavy influence from the IRC, which I also very much recommend.